Hi, I'm Sal Mercogliano, Associate Professor of History at Campbell University, a former merchant mariner, and an adjunct professor of maritime industry policy. Coming to you today with this episode of What's Going On with Shipping to give you an update on the Express Pearl, the vessel that caught fire and sunk off the coast of Colombo. As many of you are finding out or hearing finally in the mainstream news, some discussion about this vessel story a few days ago on CNN talking about the sinking of the stricken Sri Lankan cargo ship. She's not a Sri Lankan cargo ship, first of all. She's not registered in Sri Lanka. She's off the coast of Sri Lanka. That happens to be basically the extent that they got that story right there. Heightens the fear of an oil spill emergency. The issue here really is not so much the oil spill. That is going to be an issue associated with this vessel. But the bigger issue is the cargo that's on board her. Also see the story here in NPR faces an environmental disaster as a ship full of chemicals starts sinking. Okay, well, she's not full of chemicals. She has chemicals on board. Again, one of the things that tends to happen is large media outlets do not have anyone in particularly who knows a lot about maritime and shipping. And one of the reasons I kind of got thrust into the role I am today doing this YouTube channel and talking about this with all of you is because I was asked to provide some expert. I hate to use the term expert because I don't consider myself an expert, but knowledgeable input when the Ever Given went aground in the Suez back in March. And so let me break down what's going on for you right now. So, as we all know, Express Pearl has been going through a long story here. This is the excuse me, last reported position of the Express Pearl. She's a Singapore flagged vessel. Express is out of Singapore. They provide feeder service between ports. They are not the size of the large, ultra large container ships. They provide that little back to back motion there between ports to move cargoes around. The Express Pearl herself, brand new vessel built in China. And now here she is off the coast of Colombo. Let's kind of zoom out here a little bit off the coast here, give you an idea of where exactly she is. Colombo is a major port hub in the Indian Ocean. A lot of traffic coming there out of the Malacca Straits, Singapore, heading either to the Bab el Mandab, which heads up the Red Sea to the Suez, over to Hormuz into the Persian Gulf, or across the Indian Ocean down toward Madagascar and Mauritius, heading along the Cape route. So Sri Lanka has developed into a very large kind of hub around the world. Express Pearl herself, this is the story here in gCaptain, and I'll have this link in there. And also, gCaptain has a great archive on past stories, starting from the very beginning of this tragic tale, and that's what I call it, a tragic tale. Remember, this vessel initially reported a leak on board from some hazardous material, specifically nitric acid. They tried to offload this material in Qatar, in the Persian Gulf, and again in India, and they were refused permission to land this cargo. They initially had a fire down in the hold, in which they used the ship's CO2 system to flood the hold and extinguish the fire. The problem was the fire was not extinguished, the fire reignited and started basically cooking in the interior of the vessel, and it eventually spread throughout the vessel until you had the vessel basically just abandoned by the crew. They had to evacuate. There was no way for them to save that vessel, and attempts at salvage proved unsuccessful. And she's now sunk in the shallow water off the port of Colombo and Sri Lanka. And so this report, which is a Reuters report coming in, talks about the fact she's got about 1,500 containers on board, 25 tons of nitric acid on board. And they talk about the impact this is going to have in the fishing community. Sri Lanka is a huge fishing community. A lot of fishermen there. They're basically told, as this story talks about right here, we're told not to go to sea, that this has caused a lot of problems. Fishermen are very helpless. We can't do our work because of this ship for more than a week now. We are just hanging around at home. Again, very difficult for fishermen to do their jobs if they can't go out and do fishing. And remember, when fishermen are forced not to do their work, they find other means. One of the things that resulted, for example, in Somali piracy back in the early 2000s was because the coast of Somalia was overfished by outside forces that came in, forcing the fishermen there to seek another course of business, and that turned to piracy. I'm not saying Sri Lanka is going to turn to piracy, but this is one of the issues that you see right here. Ship's got about 300 tons of fuel oil remaining on board. Obviously, an issue if that fuel leaks on board. But I want to talk about some of these other stories here that comes in. So this is from Container News, more of a story about Express sinking with some great imagery here for it. But the issue that's really going to be of importance here is a couple of things. Number one, part of the cargo on board. So in the NPR story, they talk about issues here, and one of the most important here is this idea of an extreme environmental impact. So we've talked about the nitric acid, we've talked about the fuel oil on board, but one of the most dangerous things on board are these 78 metric tons of a plastic called nurdles, the raw material used to make virtually all kinds of plastic products. These are little plastic pellets, and these pellets are now washing ashore in Sri Lanka. And one of the issues with small plastic in the world's oceans is that fish see this as kind of plankton, as food, and they consume it. And obviously, it's plastic; they can't digest it. It occupies their digestive tract, and they basically die. And this is one of the big pushes to remove plastics from the world's oceans. You hear about this all the time. Everything from the sea turtles and plastic straws to the rings used to hold six packs. All of this is very important, and this ship has the basically the core material for plastic on board. Obviously, when the ship burned, the containers were compromised. Some of them broke open. We saw that early in this, and now this material is spilled out into the ocean, being washed ashore. See these images here of material coming ashore here, and now all of a sudden you have this huge environmental disaster that's taking place here. This story here, again, is from Container News, but another story here is from the insurance company, the TT Club. TT Club is providing the P&I insurance, the protection and indemnity insurance on here. And this is a story also in Container News where they talk about it, but I want to go right to their press release. This is the TT Club's press release. So they released this directly. So without going through the filter of news, go directly to TT Club and what they're talking about here. And what they're talking about is highlighting the duty of care required in shipping hazardous cargoes. So, one of the big issues is because of the number of containers that are moved around the world. Give you the idea of the number of containers that are moved. This is from the Review of Maritime Transport out by UNCTAD. And one of the things they identified here is containerized trade on mainland, east west routes, and other routes. 55.5 million on the main east west routes. On other routes, 87.7 million, a grand total of 143.3 million containers moved on the world's oceans. So it gives you an idea of just the volume of trade. Remember, that's down from 2019, largely because of COVID. But one of the things that the TT Club is talking about here is these hazardous materials that are put on board. Containers are sealed by the loader. And so either the person who initially loads it or they send material to a freight forwarder that's going to compile cargo into a box and seal it. The boxes are sealed. They arrived at ports, they're sealed, they're not open typically. Very few containers are ever opened. They may be scanned, they may be surveyed. They will look at the track record of that container, what freight forwarder they're coming from. If they're coming from someone who has no track record at all, that will raise suspicion, especially if they come from areas where not known. And so that could flag an inspection of the container. They sit in the terminals until loaded on board. They ride on the vessels for long periods of times, usually, and then arrive in ports. Ports then screen the same thing in return. And one of the problems is while you can block and brace a cargo in a container to go down a road, which is fine, they may not be sufficiently blocked and braced for a vessel on the high seas. You know, a truck going down the road typically doesn't experience 30-degree rolls, for example, on the high seas, or massive pitching and yawing of the vessel and hammering due to waves. And what eventually happens is cargo begins to break loose. And what they're talking about here in the TT Club is exactly that. They're talking about the fact that this mishandling of dangerous goods is becoming an issue. They talk in here, the vast majorities of these are initiated by a cargo of hazardous nature. One estimate puts the number of or undeclared dangerous cargoes in excess of 150,000 containers a year. Again, that's out of that total of almost 143.3 containers. So you're talking about, again, a fraction of the number there, But this is what's causing the problems. This is what's causing the problems. And one of the things that the TT Club in particular is calling for is promoting awareness, wider use of codes of practices for cargo transport units, how to go about doing this, and how to handle the movement of cargo. And one of the things we've seen over the past 20 years is the danger of this. I did an episode, and I'll have the link in the show notes here, that look back at container ship disasters. This is a story from gCaptain. This is the MOL Comfort. And as you see there, that ship does not look right for a very good reason. She's cracked right down the middle and eventually will sink. And this story from Mike Schuller back in 2018 looks at the worst container ship disasters in recent history. Express Pearl will get into that story now. She will definitely rake in there. But you see stories like this, Hanjin, Pennsylvania, back in 2002 with a fire on board, catastrophic fire on board. Hyundai Fortune with a fire on board. You see how catastrophic that is in the aft house there and the damage. The MSC Napoli, which breaks apart right here and sinks. Oh, sorry, my dog. Sorry about that. Peanut heard my son coming in the door. Here you see the Rena, which was off New Zealand, ran aground, struck a reef and sinks. You see the toppling of the containers right there and the breakup of the vessel. The MSC Flaminia, then again, another fire rocked by explosions because of cargo on board. You can see how the vessel was almost completely gutted there up forward. And again, the MOL Comfort, which suffered probably because of improper weight measurements of the containers and a load plan, resulted in the vessel breaking in half and eventually sinking in the Indian Ocean. And then the most recent, Maersk Hanem, back in 2018, suffered a catastrophic fire. Again, Hanem, which is the largest of these vessels, is only a 15,000 box vessel. I just did the special on the CMA CGM Marco Polo. That's a 16,000 box vessel. The Ever Given is a 20,000 box vessel, but we have 24,000 box vessels on the high seas right now. And again, we come back here to the Express Pearl. She's only carrying not even 1,486 containers. And so imagine environmental losses on an even greater scale. And this is why the TT Club and others are really calling upon organizations like the International Maritime Organization, the IMO, to get harder on these inspections and forcing more inspections of these containers for this dangerous and hazardous material, which is causing problems, as we see here. Right now, Sri Lanka is going to suffer from this because, again, we're moving cargo at such a great rate. So much cargo is being moved around the world today. Again, 143,263,682 containers in 2020. And we can expect to see that number increase in 2021. We're just seeing this increase exponentially here over time. And we're just seeing this number continually increase as world freight increases. We move more cargo on the ocean. In 1950, we moved half a billion tons of cargo. Today, we move over 11 billion tons. So a 22-fold increase. And it's just increasing exponentially as we go forward. Since the 1970s, since really competition by other nations other than the United States, and more importantly, the ability to move things have become much easier with containerization. And again, we're creating these problems. So be thinking about the people of Sri Lanka. Fortunately, the crew has been saved off this vessel. No loss of life has happened. However, we're seeing the economic impact on the Sri Lankans right now for an accident that did not need to be happen. Again, had Qatar, had India, had any nation allowed this vessel to come in, offload this cargo that had shifted and had caused a spill on board, this could have been prevented. And instead, what we have is a loss of a vessel and a global contamination in the Indian Ocean. So this is Sal signing off. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please, if you enjoy the video, please subscribe, hit the bell so be alerted about new videos when they come in. Also, give it a thumbs up so other people on YouTube and across the internet can find it. And please feel free to share with everybody else. If you have any comments, leave them in the show notes. I am not perfect, as everybody knows. I can make mistakes. I inadvertently called Taiwan, Malaysia for the report, the initial report on the UCL Durban, the OOCL Durban, excuse me. So I'm not perfect by any means. I do make mistakes. I am not infallible by any means. Just ask my students. This is Sal signing off.